Thanks for being here. I just want to remind everyone of two key provisions in the Endangered Species Act. One of them is to protect species at risk and their habitats and to promote the recovery of species that are at risk. And the other one is to promote stewardship activities to assist in the protection and recoveries of species at risk. What the minister is proposing today undermines those two key objectives significantly. The Liberals, quite frankly, the previous government, put the Endangered Species Act on life support. And today, the Conservative government is pulling the plug. I want to talk about three key provisions the minister talked about. The first one is that this would give the minister discretionary powers to override science-based recommendations and to interfere in the work of the scientific community. The minister said today, we need a new kind of science. Well, I'm sorry. Scientists around the world have established the precautionary principle as one of the foundations of sound environmental policy. Matter of fact, it's one of the foundations of the Ministry of Environment's mandate. And to change that science, if that's what he means by changing the science, then I find that particularly disturbing. And what does it say about the rest of the activities of the ministry? Another change is the one that's been highlighted around if a species is doing well in another jurisdiction, but not in Ontario, we can abandon that species. So I'm sorry, if I want to go count monarch butterflies on Pelee Island, but there are none, which, by the way, the monarch butterfly count on Pelee Island was canceled a couple years ago because there were no monarch butterflies to count. I guess that's okay as long as we have monarch butterflies somewhere else. That has real implications not only for the enjoyment of nature, but for our economy. And let me tell you why. Monarch butterflies are an essential pollinator. And if we're not going to protect pollinators, that puts our agricultural sector at risk. 800,000 jobs in the food and farming sector, contributing $40 billion to Ontario's GDP. Don't tell me that protecting species at risk is not an economic policy and doesn't provide economic benefits to the province of Ontario. And finally, this trust fund is a pay-to-kill provision. I mean, essentially, you're saying to developers, yeah, go ahead and cut the tree down, go ahead and kill the species, but if you pay into a fund, we'll do a little bit of research. Well, you know what? It's pretty hard to do research when the butternut trees are already cut down. It's pretty hard to do research into resiliency when the species are already gone. And here's the bottom line. We globally are facing the biggest mass extinction of endangered species since the time of the dinosaurs. And do we really want to be the ones that tell our children that so many of the things that we've enjoyed in nature, they won't be able to enjoy in their lifetime? Do we really want to be the generation that says that? And so I know a lot of people, I think, Richard, you asked this, a lot of people will say, what does it matter? What about jobs? What about development? What about the economy? Well, here's the bottom line is protecting species habitat has direct human benefits. So let's look at the Greenbelt alone. The Greenbelt provides over $3 billion in environmental goods and services to the people of Ontario. One of those is flood protection. Last August, on one day, the City of Toronto experienced $80 million in flood damage due to extreme weather events. So if we continue to allow development in significant wetlands, in endangered species habitat, and in essential green space, we prevent the Earth's ability not only to protect endangered species, but to also protect us. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted for this government to use open for business language when, we already have, so for example, 20% of the white belt, which is already slated for development and is not in endangered species habitat, only 20% of the land that's been set aside in the white belt's actually been developed. We still have 80% of it left to develop. So don't tell me that we can't have a strong economy that we can't have development, we can't have housing and not protect endangered species at the same time. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
What did you take from his rationalization on the being able to suspend protections or habitats protections for 3 years while things get sorted out?
Yeah, so we've seen that at the federal level, and we've seen it not work at the federal level, especially around caribou habitat protection. So essentially what you're saying is, oh, well, if we suspend things and we lose the species in the 3 years, well, too bad, so sad. And I don't think that's acceptable. And so, I guess the bottom line here is are we going to have protections in place that work or not?
The minister said we can, they mentioned developers and farmers a lot here and how they might be inconvenienced. He says we can appease them and take care of the endangered species at the same time, can they?
Well, you know what? A lot of environmental organizations have put forward, I think, very sound policies, particularly around supporting farmers. So, as a matter of fact, a member of the Conservative Party, Toby Barrett, has a private member's bill around the ALICE program, which actually pays farmers to protect endangered species habitat, pollinator habitat, and to provide other environmental goods and services. So why don't we provide incentives for farmers and landowners to provide habitat protection? Organizations have put forward what's called safe harbor laws that would allow landowners, farmers in particular, to report endangered species on their land and develop a protection program without the farmer losing the ability to still farm their land. So there are ways that we can create that economic balance that the minister talked about while still providing endangered species protection. And so my hope is, and you all know I'm eternally optimistic around here, my hope is that the minister was sincere when he says he would like to have input and he would like to listen to that input. And so I'm hoping there's some opportunity to provide some input for solutions like I just described that can balance economic activity with endangered species protection without blowing a hole in the Endangered Species Act.
Mike, last week the government put forward changes to conservation authorities to narrow their scope.
Yeah.
They also they have moved to lower the budgets for
cut them in half.
on flood protection. Now this. What would you say the pattern from the government is here?
I mean, the pattern has clearly been a sustained attack on environmental protections. And I want to be really clear that this is not in line with past conservative governments. It was the Bill Davis government that brought in the Niagara Escarpment Act. It was the Mike Harris government that brought in the Oak Ridges Marine Protection Act and actually expanded park protections across Ontario. So there is a rich tradition in the Conservative Party around environmental protections. Why this particular Conservative government has abandoned that and actually even in some cases undermining previous conservative environmental legislation, you'll have to ask them what their motivation is. I think it's incredibly short-sighted. And here's one particular reason why. I don't see how any government can consider itself fiscally responsible if it doesn't protect us from flooding. $1.2 billion last year in insurable losses in Ontario because of extreme weather events. Like I said, last August in Toronto, $80 million in one day. I think you probably all remember when the Don Valley was underwater. If we pave over green space, wetlands, and habitat, those floods will only get worse. And as climate change accelerates, the number of extreme weather events are only going to get worse. So imagine the hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars we're going to have to pay to clean up and respond to those extreme weather events, and how much money we're going to have to spend in things like stormwater management systems for something that the earth does for us for free.
Is it possible that this is an exercise in streamlining a process that many have said can be opaque, can be confusing, can take a very long time to resolve? Is it possible that's the intent here?
Well, I would hold out more hope for that if it didn't contain the 3 provisions I outlined. To me, that looks like a gutting of, or I would even say pulling the plug on an Endangered Species Act that was already on life support. And so, at some point we have to say, you know what, there's certain habitat that just needs to be protected. So, for example, we've lost 75% of our wetlands in southern Ontario. Like, how much more can we withstand? And so at some point you have to draw a line in the sand and say some places are appropriate development and some places are not. I do think there's some opportunities, and like I said in response to a previous question, I'm going to be putting forward, I think, some ideas and some solutions that can protect endangered species while recognizing some of the challenges that farmers, for example, face.
How many animals do you, or creatures or plants do you see being delisted under the idea that they have jurisdiction, they're elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to speculate where the ministry is going to go with that one. But it's deeply troubling, again, just because a species happens to be doing well in another jurisdiction but not in Ontario, that we would somehow gut protections for that species makes absolutely no sense to me.
Is there a diversity argument within Ontario? We need a whole range of species.
Well, I mean, absolutely. A healthy ecosystem requires a diversity of species, and as you see species decline in one area, it has oftentimes unintended and even sometimes unimaginable consequences in other areas. And so, even the best scientists can't make those kinds of predictions. Okay, thank you.